Winning Plays is brought to you by FanDuel, the exclusive wagering partner of the CLNS Media Network.
Welcome into another edition of the Winning Plays podcast. My name is Brian Robb, joined today by the one and only Brendan Jackson, B-Jax, formerly of Celtics Hub, as we begin to start what will be a long deep dive into this Celtics offseason the next 2 weeks, leading into the draft, free agency, likely some deals going on, and Celtics fans watching the NBA Finals in a bit of pain here. But Jax, first off, you're 3 games in the finals right now. What are our hot? Do we have any hot finals takes right now to get us going?
Well, I thought game 2 was very surprising because in my head I was like, there's no way this Heat team matches up with the Nugs at all. And so I just think back to, well, if the Celtics did win game 7, how much of a bloodbath would have that been? If the C's weren't prepared to, beat the Heat, where on paper it felt like the C's just had a much better team. They had the star power. They had a more complete team, deeper team. Again, highly touted team. And then to come up against the Nuggets, who just have completely overpowered the Heat. It's just like, wow. We kind of dodged a bloodbath there, I think.
Yeah, it's funny you say that because it's like part of me wonders, like looking back at it now, of like the Celtics Nuggets, like they've played well, like those have been entertaining matchups on paper in the regular season, and I wonder the respect probably would have been there more from Jump Street with this team. You would think with the Nuggets, with Jokic and Murray, and compared to the Heat, where clearly that was part of the equation of why they fell down by 0-3 in that series and how they dropped those first 2 games at home when they were just completely disrespecting the Caleb Martins of the world. But at the same time, you're right. Like in terms of like a finely tuned machine right now, the Nuggets appear to be that. They sent a match in game 3. I don't know, like the Heat could have a counter coming up regardless, but it does make you wonder if it would have been an ugly sight for the Celtics if they didn't have their stuff together.
Yeah, I think the problem is the Heat play very hard. And they run an offense with different counters. I mean, when they have Duncan Robinson diving to the basket for layups, right? When he's like on paper just a 3-point specialist, you're sort of like, oh wow, this Heat team is actually running stuff that can beat you. And then to lose by convincingly by 15 points to the Nugs, like it's like, wow, they just don't. It's sort of a star power thing. It's like Jokic can literally do whatever he wants on the court at all times. And then the C's, I go back, it's like the C's have had success against the Nuggets in the past, but they haven't played Jamal Murray in like over a year. So, and he's playing great. So it's like that just absolutely would have scared me had they matched up. This iteration, right? This sort of mindset of the C's team. I'm not talking about the ideal, what we think this Celtics team should have been.
This version, this year's playoffs, which even before the Heat series, there were issues there that were, this didn't look like last year's postseason team where the defense was there throughout. This was a team where it was, trick or treat for a lot of these nights in the postseason. But the one main news nugget we'll get into before talking more about the offseason right now, Jax, is Celtics making an addition to their coaching staff this week. 2008 NBA champion Sam Cassell. And I forgot that the 3-time NBA champion Sam Cassell, that he was on those Rockets teams at the beginning of his career back in 94, 95, which is like just crazy.
It's so crazy how fun, because I think of him as a Buck. I think of him as like Ray Allen, Tim Thomas,
that's thrown away from that 2000 East Finals, whatever it was, where they lost to the Sixers, and there was all the hoopla about the refs in those series.
Exactly. Like that's where I think of Sam Cassell, but like that's what I love about the sort of signing as a coach is that he's been around the league that long. He's been, with really good players for like 30 years, whether it be playing with, winning titles, coaching. And he wasn't like obviously the best player on any of the teams he's ever been on, but he's definitely been like very, very solid and respected. So I like it on paper, but I like a lot of things that the C's do on paper. Whether or not he has any influence over the locker room or Joe Missoula, that remains to be seen.
For sure. And I mean, as far as the players go, it seems like, and Jalen and Jason kind of talked about it before last season, like how much they wanted a hire like Ime in the first place a couple years ago, because they wanted that, that bad cop, if you will. They wanted the former player, it seemed like, that got on their face, and it seemed like they responded to that stuff. Joe Mazzulla was not that guy. And for you, everyone has their own style. He's not a former NBA player, so that's just not within his DNA necessarily, at least publicly. But it seems like Cassell, when you just talk about the range of the way his former teammates talk about him, and now the fact that he's been under Doc for, it seems like, the last 8 to 10 years now, so he should be able to kind of carry that gravitas to that group right away in the system role, and hopefully maybe make up what they lost in Sotomayor back in March there.
And that's the thing, but that goes back to what I said before, why I love it on paper, but it's not like those 76ers teams really, even reached expectations, let alone exceeded expectations. So, it's one of those things where, as much as I like to get on Joe Mazzulla for being very young, very green, doing things that not calling timeouts, just doing things that I really think are sort of baseline NBA coach things that you do, and then you tweak around the edges. Whereas he sort of come in and wanted to establish his own thing against the grain. The Sixers sort of did the opposite. They got the established coach. They got the players coach. They got the guy who will, blow him up in the media, former player, gritty guy in Doc Rivers, who's won a championship. And that hasn't worked either. So it's sort of like,
well, Doc's track record at this point, it's like that 08 championship seems like a long, long time ago.
Yeah, it seems like a long, long time ago. And it's funny because when the Celtics first hired him, I was a little skeptical too, because I didn't think his Orlando teams were that good anyway. And then obviously he absolutely struck gold with his players, but also just the way he meshed with his players. I don't want to take that away from him. Obviously he had all-world players and Paul and KG and Ray Allen and Rondo, and then a great supporting cast, Sam Cassell. But he did really connect with them, and they caught something that year that was amazing. And if it weren't for Perk, and I'm not guaranteeing, I'm not crazy like they are. They're obsessed with saying if Perk didn't get injured.
There's another title they left on the table there with injuries.
I think I think it wasn't even that one. I think it was the Shaq year for sure. Like a lot of people say the one they lost to Orlando in the Eastern Conference Finals was the year. I think the next year was the year. I think just not having the right horses, They should have done what the Celtics did with Rob Williams this year and not play Shaq.
Yeah, right. Just put him on ice
in the regular season. Exactly.
Yeah. No, it's funny. You think about teams like that now, 10 years later, how much, the Spurs were kind of on it at that point, but no of these other teams were, and it came back to bite that team, especially in a lot of those playoff series. But yeah, it is from the Doc standpoint. I just wonder, for Sam Cassell now, who has been pretty much a Doc guy coming up, pretty much, obviously going back to 08 here, what he. And it makes sense for him, for an opportunity for him to take this. I'm sure he was highly in demand on the market, but this is a place where he can, he's been waiting his turn. He's interviewed at a bunch of places as a head coaching job, hasn't gotten it yet. But this is a clear opportunity for him, because it's okay, if you get this team over the hump in the next year or two, that's going to lead a job for you. And if you don't, or if things don't go right here, you might be the guy that they turn to if they need to make a change.
Make a fast break to FanDuel during the NBA playoffs, because right now, new customers can get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's $1,000 back in bonus bets. If your first bet doesn't win, you got to get the app. The app's the way to go. It is so easy to use. You get great promotions every day with the app. It's safe and secure, and you get paid instantly. How about that? Instant cash with the FanDuel app. There's no better place to bet all your playoff action than America's #1 sportsbook. Visit FanDuel.com/Boston and get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's FanDuel.com/Boston. FanDuel, official sports betting partner of the NBA. 21 plus in select states. First online real money wager only. $10 deposit required. Refund issue is non-withdrawable bonus bets that expire in 14 days. Restrictions apply. See full terms at FanDuel.com/Sportsbook. FanDuel is offering online sports wagering in Kansas under an agreement with Kansas Star Casino, LLC. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER or visit FanDuel.com/RG. Colorado, Iowa, Michigan, New Jersey, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Illinois, Tennessee, and Virginia. 1-800-NEXT-STEP or text NEXT STEP to 53342 in Arizona. 1-888-789-7777 or visit ccpg.org/chat in Connecticut. 1-800-9-WITH-IT in Indiana. 1-800-522-4700 or visit ksgamblinghelp.com in Kansas. 1-877-770-STOP in Louisiana. gamblinghelplinema.org or call 800-327-5050 for 24/7 support in Massachusetts. Visit www.mdgamblinghelp.org in Maryland. 1-877-8-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY at 467369 in New York. 1-800-522-4700 in Wyoming or visit www.1800gambler.net in West Virginia. Now let's get back to the show.
So
yeah, I heard you say that. I forget. I think it was the Off the Pike pod I was listening to. I just stalk you on all the pods you're on. But that was such a good point. It's like he's kind of in the catbird seat because I think he is the first person to be interim if it really starts to go south with Joe Missoula. So we'll see. I mean, I'm not, again, like these are real people with real lives and real jobs. So I'm not trying to like absolutely blow up Joe Missoula. I just personally have not been happy with the job he has done.
Well, I think it's fair to say after the way things played out this past year and some of the philosophy, we'll get into the offense stuff later, but like the late game management stuff, like clearly, and he'll learn from it and there's stuff, but his philosophy on a few of those things, there needs to be someone on that bench who's at least talking him through that stuff more, at least getting through to him being like, listen, this is, and that's not him if like they need to have, whether he was, I don't know, who knows what was happening with the assistants at that point and whether he, clearly, he admitted his mistakes on a couple of those situations, whether it was, game 4 against Philly or running with the wrong guys, game 2 against the Heat at the end of that game for a lot of the crunch time there. But you'd hope that, he gives this type of higher stamp of approval. Maybe like a guy like Cassell is going to be able to, get through to him more in those spots and help make some of those tough decisions a little easier.
I think, it's interesting you say that, like you bring up like the rotation stuff, because one of the things I worry about is you can hire Sam Cassell, right? And you can have the pedigree and the experience and the respect. But if Joe is not going to play Derek White in crunch time, or he's not going to play Payton Pritchard or Grant Williams in the playoffs consistently, then what's the point? It's not going to matter. It's like, it's just, So that those are sort of, again, you hope he learns lessons and listen, he might've been right. We'll never know. Like maybe they weren't good. It's hard to say Grant wasn't, because every time he plays, it's like he does something really impactful, but we'll never know.
We'll never know for that. But looking big picture now, we heard from Brad Stevens last week. We know that the assistant coach situation was one step here as far as the big picture for this changes for this offseason. But he pointed to more of tweaks around the edges and stuff for next season. I thought you made a pretty interesting point when we were talking this past week about the roster in the postseason and what things were kind of left with there against the Heat at the end of the road. They're looking at towards what some of these other teams were able to do this postseason, and the fact that this team's only addition at the trade deadline was Mike Muscala, who did not play a meaningful minute in the postseason all year. What was your big picture look at that now in hindsight, especially with how like this new CBA is looking at it?
Yeah, and thanks. And like hindsight is 2020. It's the big caveat, but I just think it's brutal to go in to the trade deadline having a chance, just because the trade deadline was like it was just weird this year. It was like guys were going for nothing. And it's like, you got Mike Muscala for almost nothing. But you didn't play him. You got basically a 14th man. You traded your 15th man for a 14th man, in Justin Jackson. And you could have traded nothing for a guy like Sadiq Bey or Jared Vanderbilt, who, Vanderbilt, I think, is a little bit more of a flawed player, but a super long wing defender who can rebound, could have helped the Celtics against the Heat. Also maybe could have protected Brogdon a little bit from, higher usage. Who knows how he got that injury. Maybe he was going to be injured anyway. And obviously when the Celtics lost their 3-point shooting, having a guy like Sadiq Bey stand in the corner and hit threes and being a sort of wing defender, that would have been helpful. And those are two guys, I think, on like their last years or their second to last years of their rookie deals. So even if you had them and lost them for nothing, well, who cares? You could have been in the finals with those guys.
Yeah, I think it's with Bay, particularly, like both of those guys are on bargain contracts that are going to go through next season. And they were pretty much, Vanderbilt was part of a bigger deal with a lot of moving parts. But his value within that deal was not substantial. Like he was a throw-in. He was a throw-in. Like you could have had him for like Beek was pretty much had for like 4 second-round picks, and I think Vanderbilt probably was a similar price. Neither of those guys went for a first-round pick. And so when you look at who Joe Mazzulla was playing there and like who he felt he could play, obviously not trusting Hauser, not trusting Pritchard even when Brogdon was hurt, like. I think either of those guys would have been a step above them on the totem pole as far as size-wise or just experience-wise to be able to give them something. And now, moving forward would have made your life a little bit easier this offseason when you have another cheap part of the roster under wraps here and don't have to worry about, finding the edges around that. So it is the fact that the trade deadline really isn't talked about now, I think is not an oversight, but I think it should be looked at, because when you come that close and injuries did pop up and you still were only playing 7 or 8 guys and half those guys had nothing going on in game 7, if not more, and there was nowhere that Joe Mazzulla could turn to, then you have to be like, okay, why didn't we push in a little bit more here?
But that speaks to a disconnect between Brad and Joe, because obviously Joe felt like he couldn't play Hauser or Pritchard in the playoffs. And Brad, I think, did. I think he thought
that was a mistake though
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I think going back to what Ryan said at the last Winning Plays pod, like it was pretty clear you couldn't play Brogdon. For as good as Brogdon's been as his career, he gave you negative minutes. He was really couldn't guard anyone, and he couldn't shoot after his arm injury. So it's like it was brutal, And so I think you absolutely should have gone to Hauser in those sort of second, third quarter. Try to play him 10 minutes a game. Try to get 9 points out of him. That's only 3 threes for a dude who shoots like high 40, mid 40s, It's just like, it's not, you can say what you want about his defense. I think him being hunted and stuff is a little overplayed. I think good teams find the weak link, even if you had a team full of Marcus Smarts, they're going to try to hunt someone. But the Heat got by with Strus and Lowry. So like, why couldn't you hide Hauser somewhere, No,
I think it's very you didn't have, there wasn't even enough evaluation to give. Like he got a couple like 5-minute stints and that was even in the Hawks series. So it's like, it's really, you couldn't really gauge anything from that in terms of like what he's actually able to do. And it's tough when you're posting, but that's what happens when, you put yourself in a bind in a lot of these spots. And so you never give yourself the opportunity to give a guy like that a chance. But at the same time, there are many spots in the postseason where it's like, this is a good time to maybe look deeper into your bench. And so if Joe's not going to trust those guys, then you have to figure out, okay, what type of guys is he going to trust? And what type of guys can we put in there to do it? And if those are the guys you want him to trust, then you need to, like you said, there needs to be a better connect there in terms of being like, hey, like Payton Pritchard played a lot of minutes last year for a team that went to the NBA Finals. Yep. And he wasn't the perfect player there, but he also like had some pretty big games. And I guess a lot of changed about this team a year later, but like, did Payton Pritchard get that much worse this year where you can't even put him out? Like, I don't know.
No, I think his shot got better, and he's just a competitor. He fights for rebounds. He's competitive on the defensive end. It's like really frustrating to see a guy like that sit on the bench when you got guys that don't look like they're competing hard. I don't want to say they're not, because, you know, it's really hard to be an NBA player, but like they don't look like they're trying as hard as they should. And you got guys that are ready to come in and try. So, I mean, look at a guy like Christian Braun last night for the Nuggets. Yep. That was insane. And granted, that could have been, you know, an aberration, right? But like
we had a bad game too, but then he bounced back. It's like one of those things where it's, you know, you can give him that chance.
And I'll be completely honest, like before I started watching the series, I had no idea who he was. Like, I'm not even going to lie. I was like, oh, he played at Kansas? Cool. I had no idea, you know? And it's like, I watched him play in that game too. And I was like, oh, this guy looks like he's like an unfocused ball of energy. And then when you see him actually connect, like last night, you're like, oh, it might look unfocused, but he's just playing hard. Like, and the Celtics needed guys that were just going to play hard. I think you play hard, you compete on defense, you beat the Heat. And there, especially game 7, that was just a complete lie down. Like it just was. And it was, there's no like other kind way to say it. It just was. They just kind of gave up.
So big picture now as we wrap up for the offseason, we'll get, I mean, there's much bigger questions in play here, but for now, I want to like, from the bench perspective for you, like where do you go right now? If you're this team, if you're looking at what you have under contract, which is pretty much everyone coming back outside of Grant, you're obviously, I guess I'll put it to you on the guard front. Like, what do you do with Smart, White, Brogdon, Pritchard? I think it's fair to say all 4 of those guys will not be coming back next year. Do you just see what you can get for Pritchard and try to use that to address a different part of the roster? Or do you like to use one of those other salaries to maybe upgrade somewhere else and keep Pritchard move him into that third guard role?
I mean, I would love to see Pritchard get a chance, because I've told you this privately. I think, and this might be like too hot of a take, I think Pritchard's ceiling is like a Fred VanVleet, like a very small, active scorer, active defender. Obviously he's not as good as Fred VanVleet now. You know, VanVleet's got elite hands.
I feel like I heard this during his rookie year though. I feel like that
oh really
was made like, you know, when he like remember he came out of the gate like and was just like, because he played during that year and everyone's like, wow, that Pritchard guy, he can play. And then ever since then it's kind of been like up and down for him from just a playing time standpoint. So it's like, it feels like Miles like years away now where that happened, but you're just like, oh yeah, like if he was playing 30 minutes a game, you wonder like, oh yeah, what could he put up?
Right. And maybe I'm just not as novel as I thought I was. But no, it's
maybe it was you. It was probably you who told me who made that comparison years ago.
Well, I mean, it's also pretty obvious. They're both like 6 feet tall.
Yeah, it's natural.
You know, yeah, older vets, you know, older college players, right? They kind of line up. But I just like it is frustrating because I would love to see him get a chance because I think he can score the ball. I think he's active. I think he's a gritty defender, even if he's like, you know, even if he's not, obviously he has his athletic and size limitations, but he's not going to back down. And there's definitely something qualitative about that in that you want on the team and in your rotation. The problem is all the guys outside of Derek White, who I think should be untouchable. I think he's very important to this team. I don't see how you get an upgrade. Like, I don't know how you can upgrade. Like, who's going to want Payton Pritchard? He doesn't play. So like, unless it's Danny in Utah, right? And Danny, Danny drafted him, right?
Yep.
So like, he sees something in him if he wants him, but there's no one on Utah. Maybe it was Vanderbilt, right? That was what people were sort of surmising over last season, and now Vanderbilt's gone. So like, I don't see anyone on the Jazz that he's going to want to flip, for Payton Pritchard. So, and I don't, and Brogdon, I mean, he has no value now. I mean, he and I love Malcolm Brogdon, but like, the dude hasn't been healthy his whole career. So, and he got unhealthy despite being the sixth man, and despite, trying to watch his minutes, he got unhealthy at the worst possible time. Last year it was Robb. This year it was Malcolm Brogdon. Next year, Al Horford's a year older. Grant's probably gone. The only thing you're adding is a coming off injury Gallinari. So I don't know, man. It's looking pretty bleak. Right. I'm not trying to be a doomsayer.
I think Grant. But... I think the odds are in favor of Grant coming back, because I'm not sure he's going to get them. There is an offer that the Celtics would walk away from. I'm not sure he's going to get that. The Celtics obviously have to hope that he's not going to get that, but it's but you have to, at the same time, there'll be a lot of debate in terms of like how much can we afford to give him long term too. Like that's going to be a little rocky ground there.
I think a team that doesn't have a fourth guy, who is maybe on the precipice, or doesn't like their fourth guy, I don't know if this is necessarily an upgrade, but I feel like the Hawks have been trying to get rid of John Collins since he was drafted by them.
Yeah.
So it's like Grant would come in making less than John Collins. Right. John Collins, I think, was making like $20 million a year. I think Grant's looking at like 16. And the Hawks are probably like, that would be an upgrade because we would feel more comfortable playing a guy like Grant. So I'm not saying that's just like literally off the top of my head. And that's just one team, right? So like, I think there could be 5 teams that want to give Grant $16 million a year. Is that the contract? Do you think 4 for 16 plus 16 per?
I think that's what he's aiming for sure. I wonder if it's going to be something closer to the regular mid-level now, which is like 12 or 13 a year. And I think that's a number that the Celtics can swallow hard and say, okay, we can deal with that, because that's going to be a tradable contract down the line if we need it to be. And we can't afford to lose them.
I don't understand why they're not more. I don't understand why he didn't play. I don't understand why they're not trying to retain him outside of, and I don't fully understand the new cap rules. And I told you I was going to read Ryan's piece, and I haven't yet. And I'm trying to wrap my head around it, but it seems like there are really hard penalties coming up for the Celtics if they re-sign everyone. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, they'll be coming like a year or two down the road. So that's the thing. It's like, you can conceivably, like, what you can do is you can bring it all back now, maybe add some parts, but then that's going to make tougher decisions a year from now, and then maybe a tougher trade market if you're looking to dump money then, because everyone else is also probably going to be looking to do the same thing. So it's like, do you want to do the hard stuff now, or do you want to hunt for like really push all in for a year or two? I presume that's what they're gonna try to do, the way that Brad Stevens talked about it, and whether or not they can try to do both. By maybe dumping some salary now and bringing back the guys you want to bring back. That's gonna be the question.
I don't think they're necessarily wrong, but they're in a really hard situation with Al going to be 38 by the end of next year, and Robb a question mark, Grant a question mark, maybe not coming back, Brogdon a question mark. Like, they have a great team on paper, but they didn't have the horses to get it done this year, and the horses next year are older. And I read, I don't know, I should have checked the byline, but I just read Mass Live's update on Bagaran. He does not seem like, he seems like he's going to get a chance, but he doesn't seem like he's going to be the savior.
No, I don't. And he actually just announced today he's signing with another team in France for the next 2 years. So my guess is he's, we won't be seeing him or Mr. Madar those aren't going to be the game changers for the 23-24 season.
It seems like they're done. Does he have an NBA buyout for after next season?
Well, that's the question. Yeah. We'll find that out.
It sounds like those draft and stash guys just didn't work out, which happens, right? They're second round picks. It's a gamble. It's fine. But
they're young enough too, where they still they might just not be ready till they're 24, 25, which happens for some guys. But you're right.
Yeah.
It's a flyer.
It's also like, he's 6'5", wing player who doesn't shoot threes well. Like, you could get it. If you got Justin Holiday, a 36-year-old Justin Holiday, or however old he is, it's probably an upgrade on Bagaran right now. Right. And it's just, I just don't see. The Heat are incredibly lucky and skilled at getting those undrafted players that are as good as they are. And let's be honest, if the Heat are skilled at finding those guys, but they're also like really lucky because if the Heat knew those guys were going to be those guys, they would have drafted them. You know what I mean?
Right.
It's
Totally.
like, so I don't want to give them too much credit, but I want to give them the appropriate amount of credit. But like Gabe Vincent can play. Duncan Robinson can play. Max Strus can sort of play. And, it's just, and Caleb Martin obviously can play against the Celtics. So I just don't see where you find those guys. And one more thing about Caleb Martin, though, is like, obviously he could play offensively. He didn't really show it until the end of this season consistently, but he had an edge. You know what I mean? He was never afraid. Even like 2 years ago, playing against him, like you could tell he just played with an edge. It's like, let's find that guy. I mean, Grant plays with an edge. Everyone was dogging him for getting in Jimmy Butler's face. And anyone who knows basketball loves that. Like, because no one in the C's was doing that stuff. They needed that, and it didn't work out. But like, at least someone was willing to do that and not be scared, not back down. That's my soapbox.
No, I agree. I mean, we'll see if those type of guys are back in uniform next year for this team, and that's going to be, I think, the biggest question. Whether the Grants of the world, and I think Pritchard is not like from an effort and intensity, at least what it looks like compared to some other guys. Like those, I think this team would be well served having more of those guys on the floor next year. But
what's a dream scenario in your mind? Like how do you see this team improve from the current roster they have?
Ideally, I would think you resign Grant, bring back Pritchard, and trade Brogdon for another upgrade for a part of the roster, or at least something else. You're not going to get an upgrade for him, but you're going to get at least some other two guys that help you in other parts of the roster, and you kind of go from there.
Yeah. So I think my homework for the next pod is going to be to scour rosters and look for guys that would come in like and match salaries with Brogdon or somewhere before, less than that. But I think Brogdon's value, as much as I love him as a player, I think he's incredibly valuable. He's steady. He's a very good offensive player. His defense, I think, has slipped as he's gotten older and injured. I think his value is at an all-time low. So you might have to give up something of value to get off his contract, but also get something back. And that to me just doesn't, it gives me, it's going to be really hard. It's why they paid a lot of money, I guess.
There's not going to be finding a slam dunk deal on that front. It's going to be tough. And then you are going to have to make a choice being like, okay, do we get Brogdon back for another year here and move on from Pritchard and make some other tweaks there, or is it worth giving up something with Brogdon to get maybe the better fit for a 6th or 7th man on this roster, which is funny to say about the 6th man of the year, but even before he got hurt in the playoffs, he was not that guy. So that's that's going to be something that we're going to have plenty of time to dig into. We got draft coming up in 2 weeks, Jax. We got free agency coming up in 3 weeks. Things are going to get busy around here. We'll keep out of here at the Winning Plays Pod with B-Jax, with Ryan, and Forsberg, a whole other host of characters throughout the summer here. So in the meantime, rate, review, subscribe to us here at the Winning Plays Pod. And Jax, thanks for coming on.
Thanks, B.
And we'll catch you guys next week.
CLNS Media's Celtics coverage is brought to you by FanDuel. New customers get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's bonus bets back if your first bet doesn't win.